This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening. Tonight's top stories. China's president in Brazil for the G20 summit, set for talks with both rivals and partner nations, in the shadow of uncertainty over transition at the White House. A North Korea's leader calls for unlimited expansion of the country's nuclear capabilities to counter US-led threats and its deterrence strategies with Japan and South Korea. China repeats its call for peace after the US cleared Ukraine to use its long-range weapons against military targets in Russia. And Washington and Manila sign an agreement to share military intelligence amid the Philippines' intensifying confrontations with China in the South China Sea. And also on East Asia tonight, blue skies back in China's big cities. How Beijing tackled an air pollution problem. But is the airpocalypse gone for good? G20 leaders are gathering in Brazil to discuss global conflict, poverty, boosting climate finance, as well as multilateral initiatives, with all that facing the possibility of an upending when Donald Trump returns to the White House in January. The two-day summit in Rio de Janeiro will cap a farewell diplomatic tour by US President Joe Biden. China's president, plus leaders of Australia, Britain, Egypt, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, and Japan are also in attendance. And more on Mr. Xi's agenda for the next few days. CNA's Tan Jongun joins us live from Shanghai. Jongun, President Xi Jinping will be meeting his Brazilian counterpart. What are they going to be talking about?
Well, it's about morning in Brazil, about 7 a.m., about 2 hours after sunrise in Rio. The pair will meet 2 days from today in about 50 hours. Wednesday at 10 a.m. Well, on his arrival in Rio last night, President Xi did release a written statement. In it, he says he looked forward to having an in-depth exchange of views with his Brazilian counterpart on further enhancing China-Brazil ties, promoting synergy between the two countries' development strategies, as well as international and regional issues of common concern. Now, in that statement, he called both countries like-minded friends with similar aspirations, noting that he has visited Brazil 4 times. Mr. Xi said that he feels very close to Brazil and even called the country this passionate land. He further remarked that both sides celebrate 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties. The two countries are at an important juncture of building past achievements and forging ahead. The language is obviously very warm and the two sides clearly have very good ties. He also noted that both countries have made the voice of the global south heard in international arena and made important contributions to world peace. Now, if you recall, of course, China and Brazil were partners in a peace proposal for Ukraine. Diplomacy aside, China is also Brazil's top trading partner. They are both important markets for each other. China takes in nearly 70% of Brazil's soybeans and iron ore. In the first 10 months of this year, bilateral trade grew nearly 10% year on year. That's double China's total growth in foreign trade. Now, unlike many countries, Brazil enjoys a trade surplus with China. This year, that surplus narrowed somewhat. Still, China is a source of cost-effective equipment for Brazil for much needed economic growth in Brazil. In fact, one area of discussion could be in the area of telecommunications. Brazil has offered the use of a military space for a Shanghai-based satellite company to compete with Elon Musk's Starlink internet service. But the Shanghai company will need approval from the central government for this to go ahead. Now, satellite link internet will greatly improve communications for a country like Brazil with large tracts of jungle, sparsely populated areas, whereby relay stations would not be viable or practical. Wei Su?
Jongun, I think possibly, and you might agree as well, Mr. Xi might have a slightly trickier meeting with the UK Prime Minister. Now, Keir Starmer, of course, elected in July of this year after years of slightly testy relations between China and the UK. He will be looking to reset relations. Is that what we can be expecting when these two leaders meet?
Yeah, you're right that it will be a lot testier when it comes to the meeting between the UK and Chinese leaders. Now, Sir Starmer would be the first British PM to meet Xi Jinping in half a decade. That's, of course, quite telling in terms of the amount of time that has lapsed since they met, since the two sides met. Now, Sir Starmer has said he would have serious and pragmatic discussions with Xi Jinping. Trade will, of course, be one of the issues, as China is one of the UK's largest trading partners as well. Trade between the two sides, however, is facing a slow and steady decline. In the first 9 months of this year, trade actually declined 0.5% year on year. Now, that's on the backdrop of China's foreign trade growing overall. Now, exports declined about 0.2%, while imports dropped about 3.2%. Now, when asked if he wanted better relations than, say, past British governments, Sir Starmer merely repeated that he would pursue a pragmatic and serious relationship. In a statement not likely to be welcomed by Beijing, Mr. Starmer added that there has not been sufficient contact under the governments of his predecessors, particularly on the issue of human rights. Wei Su?
Oh, thanks. Tan Yu-guan there speaking explaining to us, laying out Mr. Xi's top meetings he will have while he is in Brazil. They're live from Shanghai. China's president has warned against US-China decoupling, adding he is ready to work with incoming President Donald Trump. Xi Jinping was speaking during a meeting with his American counterpart, that's incumbent President Joe Biden, on the last day of the APEC summit in Peru. President Xi called for bilateral cooperation, maintaining that a policy of containing China would be, quote, bound to fail, arguing against the waging of another Cold War. Both leaders stressed the need to maintain communication, with both professing the need for stability in bilateral ties. President Xi reiterating that the Taiwan issue remains a red line and that the US should not interfere in bilateral disputes and refrain from engaging in provocation. President Biden says strategic competition should not escalate into war. It's believed this would be their last meeting before Mr. Biden hands over power in January. President-elect Donald Trump will take over in January and has pledged to come down hard on Chinese imports, threatening a 60% tariff. North Korean leader Kim Jongun is calling on the army to improve its capabilities to prepare for fighting an actual war. He says the US and ally South Korea are behind tension during what he calls the worst phase in history. Mr. Kim is urging the military to strengthen defense with an unlimited bolstering of nuclear forces. He also slammed cooperation between the US, Japan, and South Korea as a critical factor, threatening peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. The trio recently held talks on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Peru. The North Korean leader has warned of a US-led military alliance expanding into larger areas, encompassing not just the Asia-Pacific region, but Europe as well. Mr. Kim warned that the US and the West are using Ukraine in a war against Russia, using what he calls Ukrainian shock troops to expand the scope of military intervention. He made no mention, though, of Pyongyang's troops deployed to assist Moscow. The US, South Korea, and Ukraine have reported the presence of more than 10,000 North Korean soldiers in Russia, with some already engaging in combat. Earlier, CNA's Teresa Tang spoke to Grant Newsham. He's a senior research fellow at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. He says the region should be concerned about Mr. Kim's remarks, as Pyongyang has improved its military capabilities.
He's acting like somebody who knows he has the backing of Russia, of China, and that is a lot of support. You can see the assistance he has given the Russians from day one of the war in Ukraine. And he's done it without any real concern he's going to be punished by anybody. He doesn't appear to fear sanctions, which are really meaningless at this point. The Chinese and the Russians are not at all enforcing them, nor is the West, actually. They're just watching. Now, the North Korean military, of course, has its limits as to what it can do on the peninsula, say if it were to attack South Korea. But it has improved its missile capabilities, its nuclear capabilities, its delivery systems, to the point where even the United States is in range now. This has just been an engineering problem. The North Korean military has improved. As I said, in an all-out war, it might have some trouble if it went after South Korea and the Americans. But that's not the way to look at it. You have to look at what North Korea is doing in conjunction with what Russia is doing in Europe, with what China is doing to support Russia, but also China's intentions in the Pacific. So it's one part of a bigger puzzle. And this is something to be very concerned about.
Speaking of pieces of a puzzle, let's bring in Donald Trump. We know he's set to enter the Oval Office in just a few weeks. He has long said that NATO members don't really take their defense seriously. Are North Korea's moves a testament to that? How emboldened will North Korea become amidst a second Trump presidency, do you think?
Well, I think they're going to be less emboldened than they were under the Biden administration. We have 4 years of empirical evidence. And you have Putin invading Ukraine. You have the Chinese throwing their weight around. North Korea's capabilities have improved, as I've described. So nothing that the Biden administration did seemed to deter North Korea or anyone else for that matter. And it's worth remembering how Team Biden crowed that they were the adults who were taking over. Well, I would hate to see what the children would have done. A Trump administration is going to very much understand the risks facing not just the United States, but the entire free world. And they are going to be far stricter, far tougher on North Korea, China, and Russia. But things have deteriorated to the point where the new administration has its work cut out for it.
We know North Korea has deployed troops to Russia to support Moscow's war with Ukraine. Washington now approving long-range weapons to be used in Russian territory. How much more involvement do you expect to see from Pyongyang when it comes to Russia?
Well, I think they'll do whatever they're asked, and what they have provided already has been considerable. Millions of artillery shells, small arms ammunition, and long-range rockets and missiles. This is a lot, and they would not have done it if they didn't have approval from their friends in Beijing. So sending troops, of course, that's even something just more extraordinary. North Korea, of all people, really a starving country, feels comfortable enough, feels that it has enough support to send large numbers of infantry to Russian-held Ukraine to fight with the Russians. This must embarrass the Russians to no end, to have an Asian nation have to come and back them up.
U.S. President Joe Biden has reportedly given the go-ahead to Ukraine to use American-supplied weapons to strike deep into Russia. This is a first such approval that Kyiv had been hoping for months, and 2 months before Donald Trump takes office at the White House. This marks a major reversal in policy. Multiple reports citing U.S. officials point to the move being likely a response to North Korea deploying troops in aid of Moscow. Reports say Ukraine plans to conduct its first long-range attack using the Army Tactical Missile System, or the ATACMS. The plan is to hit Russian targets far from its borders to force Moscow to the negotiating table. The Kremlin warns that if Western weapons are fired deep into Russia, it will not be Ukraine doing the targeting, but those countries giving permission. Moscow also accusing the outgoing Biden administration of seeking to, quote, throw oil on fire and of escalating the conflict in Ukraine. A response from China repeating its calls for a peaceful settlement to the war. Beijing adding that an early ceasefire and a political solution is in the interest of all parties, and that a de-escalation is of the utmost urgency. Alexander Korolev, senior lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of New South Wales, weighs in on the effectiveness of ATACMS and whether the U.S. shift in strategy at this point can alter the course of war.
I don't think it will make a significant difference. It's mostly a political and symbolic decision. As you rightly noted, drones can fly even further. The 300 kilometers are not much for a country like Russia. Those missiles won't be able to hit any significant political centers. It's really mostly probably aiming at the Kursk region and other occupied territories, occupied by Russia, original Ukrainian territories. So it is, again, I see it mostly as a political maneuvering in the White House. again, to do the right thing, so to speak, by the Democrats, and to make to make Trump suffer, in a sense, as a political figure. That's the primary motivation, I would say, because again, technically speaking, it's not going to be a turning point. It's not going to tip balance of power significantly in Ukraine's favor. So yeah, I think it might result in more deaths on both sides, but it's not going to change the dynamics and the outcome of the war in Ukraine.
Several NATO countries have expressed concern about the incoming U.S. administration amid expectations that President-elect Trump could end U.S. military support for Ukraine. Jagroti Dave looks at how U.S. policy could potentially change under this new leader.
Donald Trump and many of his supporters who are in Congress now have been very critical of the level of that support that the Biden administration has been providing. Those Republicans have stalled many a bill that's attempted to pass through through Congress that includes aid for Ukraine. So Donald Trump, he has said that he would end the war very quickly, but he hasn't said how. The Washington Post, if you remember, has reported that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin held a phone call after Donald Trump's victory, where apparently Donald Trump urged Vladimir Putin not to escalate the war inside Ukraine. The Kremlin is denying that such a phone call took place, but this is an indication of, I guess, the sort of thing that Donald Trump wants to say that he can do, that he's got this personal relationship with Putin so he could end the war just like that. His vice president pick, J.D. Vance, has actually outlined a plan that would involve Russia basically keeping the Ukrainian territory that it has already captured. Now, that's why this Kursk region is actually quite important, because the Ukrainians feel that they would be able to potentially trade in any territory that they have in that Kursk region in Russia for any Ukrainian territory that Russia holds in future negotiations. So that's why Ukraine has been wanting these ATACMS for so long, and why they think that this will help them in any future negotiations. But of course, given Donald Trump's skeptical outlook on aid to Ukraine and the things that he said about ending the war but not really saying how, I think a lot of eyes are going to be on those future peace talks under Donald Trump's leadership to see how, in fact, he decides to navigate those waters.
And still ahead on this bulletin, a $7 billion buyback plan boosts investor confidence in Samsung. The stock rebounds as much as 7%. While South Korea's 4 major entertainment agencies eagerly await the return of its core artists as profits plummet. And Roland is here with your business news update. Roland, all those stimulus measures from China somehow still failing to convince.
Afraid so, Wei Su. 2 U.S. investment banks warn political tensions, tariffs could impact the outlook for Chinese equities next year. Goldman Sachs says that while Hong Kong stock valuations look cheap, it may miss out on the benefits of China's stimulus measures and prefers A shares instead. Now, Goldman is more bullish on mainland stocks than Morgan Stanley, predicting that the blue chip CSI 300 will hit 4,600 points by next year. That's up around 6% from current levels. Now, Morgan Stanley's base case is for the CSI 300 to end up at 4,200 points by the end of 2025. That's up around 4.7%. Both banks expect the renminbi to weaken against the dollar, with Goldman Sachs forecasting the dollar RMB exchange rate at 7.50 to the dollar at the end of next year. Morgan Stanley, 7.60 per dollar. The blue chip CSI 300 index fell 0.5% today. The tech-laden Shenzhen component tracking losses from their U.S. counterparts. The Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong, however, snapping a 6-day losing streak. Banks picked up pace on optimism that they'll be whipped into shape by regulators to improve their performance and share valuations. Meantime, shares of Samsung surging today, closing up nearly 6%. Now, South Korean company's surprise plan to buy back shares worth some $7.2 billion to boost shareholder value gave a lift to investor sentiment. Still, its share price still nearly 29% down so far this year. Concerns that its memory chip business has fallen behind in the artificial intelligence market, is weighing on the tech giant. The shares of its competitor SK Hynix have climbed about 23% this year on investor enthusiasm for its AI chips. Now, Samsung is still struggling to catch up with TSMC in outsourced chip making. It is also having to contend with tough competition in sluggish markets for smartphones and other consumer electronics. Analysts say the buyback will provide a short-term boost to its stock price, but the company needs to find ways to regain its technological edge. Meantime, South Korea's biggest company and most valuable will repurchase the stock in stages over the coming 12 months. South Korea's 4 major entertainment companies are facing declining profitability. The K-pop industry is recording a slowdown due to weakening album sales with the inactivity of record-breaking groups such as Blackpink and BTS. 3 of the country's 4 largest agencies saw their operating profits shrink in the third quarter of the year, while one firm swung to a loss. The decline in profitability is largely attributed to the absence of their core artists. Now, BTS, which has been a significant growth driver for Hybe, is scheduled to resume full activities next year following the members' mandatory military service, which began in 2022. YG Entertainment's Blackpink, that's a leading force in global K-pop, is expected to return next year. Another factor is the increased investment costs of new artists and staging global events. Citi Research suggests K-pop could look forward to a profitable year in 2025. It expects the aggregate revenue of the big 4 agencies to grow by more than 21%, as those returning of the top groups and more money from fandom platforms help to shore up revenue. India's Tata Electronics has reportedly sealed a deal to acquire a majority stake in Taiwanese manufacturer Pegatron's only iPhone plant in India. The pact is expected to further solidify the Indian conglomerate's position as an Apple supplier. Under the joint venture, Tata will hold a 60% stake to run its daily operations, while Pegatron will hold the remaining stake and handle technical support. Now, Tata's production capacity is almost on par with rival Foxconn, which produces the most iPhones in the country's only other iPhone assembly plant. Now, Apple has been diversifying its production beyond China amid geopolitical tensions and Trump's tariff plans. India is forecast to contribute around a quarter of total iPhone shipments this year, and that's up from 12% to 14% in 2023. Japan's tourism agency has called for the removal of the tax-free shopping ceiling for tourists as part of its tax reforms request for fiscal 2025. That's as it seeks to boost spending by inbound travelers, which is what's on the rise following the yen's prolonged weakness. Now, duty-free purchases of consumables such as food and cosmetics have a daily cap of around $3,200 per shopper per store. However, amid the yen's decline, demand for high-end beverages and cosmetic products has strengthened, triggering calls for the removal of the spending cap, which is seen as hindering sales growth. The duty-free program has expanded over the years as part of Japan's push to bolster its tourism sector. But it has also led to an increasing number of visitors purchasing items tax-free, then reselling them for a profit. Now, to address this, authorities are considering making shoppers pay for the consumption tax up front before having it refunded prior to the time of departure. Tourist spending is said to become the island's second biggest export sector after autos and ahead of the electronics components sector. Travelers spent more than $30 billion in the first 9 months of the year, surpassing the $34 billion accumulated for the entire 2023. Quick check on the equity markets in Japan and South Korea. Japan's Nikkei closing in the red after Bank of Japan chief Kazuo Ueda failed to offer strong hints on the timing of additional interest rate hikes. Ueda reiterated that the central bank is prepared to raise borrowing costs if the economy aligns with its forecasts, while cautioning about external risks, including uncertainty of the U.S. economy and volatile financial markets. South Korea's Kospi rose more than 2%, logging its sharpest daily jump in about 2 months, and that's as market heavyweight Samsung surge on buyback plans. And that is the latest business, Wei Su.
Oh, thanks for that, Roland. I'll still ahead on East Asia tonight as G20 leaders gather for a summit in Brazil. We ask an expert what leaders could want amid what could be seismic shifts in how the U.S. sees trade, security, and the very function of global institutions. As the U.S. and the Philippines ink a fresh deal to share military intelligence amid increased confrontation between Manila and Beijing in the South China Sea. North Korean leader Kim Jongun calls for completing war preparations and boosting nuclear forces amid increased military confrontation. A major strategy shift. U.S. President Joe Biden allows Ukraine to fire American missiles inside Russian territory for the first time as Pyongyang helps bolster Moscow's forces. China's president in Brazil for the G20 summit, set for talks with both rival and partner nations in the shadow of uncertainty over transition at the White House. And for more on the G20 summit, Stephen Nagy joins us live from Tokyo. He is a professor of politics and international studies at the International Christian University. Thanks for joining us this evening, Professor Nagy. Now, that shadow of uncertainty in the White House, it's not just in the U.S., is it? This is perhaps one of the first summits in a while that we're seeing leaders gathered at the table. Whatever they agree on, if they agree on anything, they might not be there in a few months to make sure these deals are pushed through.
That's right. There's a lot of uncertainty amongst the G20 leaders. The reality is this is not the election year of incumbents. We've seen this with Mr. Trump's election, but other governments as well, we've seen incumbent leaders leave. So really what's decided at the G20 will be somewhat tentative. Everybody's waiting for the changes in the White House in January. And what will the Trump 2.0 administration bring? No one really knows. But what we do know is that Mr. Trump will come in. He has a new agenda, an agenda that focuses on strength through peace through strength, on tariffs, and on really moving away from the Biden administration's systemic, sequential, and allies first approach to foreign policy in East Asia.
All right, what we do know, so campaign slogans like securing peace through strength, looking at what promises were made in the campaign, what has been said by key figures around Mr. Trump, and of course, who he has appointed to key positions both in domestic and foreign policy. 2017, when Mr. Trump was in the White House, 2024 or 2025 rather, we are looking at a very different Mr. Trump, which are leaders in Asia, in East Asia. They need to be factoring that in, do they not?
Absolutely. We've seen the nomination of Mark Rubio, who is a China hawk, who is banned from visiting China, who has advocated for strong positions on Taiwan that go against the one China policy. This is going to be a game changer for U.S.-China relations. Bob Lighthouser, former United States trade representative, who's advocated for 60% tariffs on products made in China. This is going to fundamentally put more downward pressure on the Chinese economy, but also put pressure on all the economies that are dependent on the Chinese economy within Asia, whether it's Japan, South Korea, or the Southeast Asian countries. They have a complex and generally positive economic relationship with China, but at the same time, there's some challenges in those bilateral relations. So in terms of security and defense, in terms of diplomacy, in terms of trade, the leaders in East Asia are looking for how they can build bridges, but how they can prevent some of the challenges that are going to emerge from a tougher, I think, leaner and meaner Trump administration in the region.
And part of that, I suppose, Trump-proofing themselves against a leaner, meaner administration in the White House would be reaching out to each other and China as well. We've seen that, signing trade deals, the restarting of free trade talks between China, South Korea, and Japan after they have stalled for years. So despite these security challenges, they are finding their way around that, at least on trade.
It's true. So we should be clear that the region is very heterogeneous. There's lots of different relationships with Washington. I do think Tokyo will probably do much better with the Trump administration in terms of deepening the alliance and strengthening positions in the South China Sea and in the Sea of Japan. South Korea may have a more difficult time as it deals with the Trump administration, who's often demanded that South Korea put more on the table in terms of self-defense. In Southeast Asia, again, these countries don't want to choose between the United States and China, and their leaders consistently say that we want to have a strong partnership with China, at the same time, a strong partnership with the United States. With that, they're going to start to build bridges. They're going to invest in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Likely, they're going to expand the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think they're going to find ways to cooperate on the environment, maybe piracy, illegal, unregulated, undocumented fishing. But at the same time, they're going to invest in minilateral relationships, such as the South Korean, Japan-US relationship that you mentioned, to demonstrate that they're increasing the burden sharing that the United States is demanding. So it's a mixed bag of working with the United States, working with partners in East Asia, but also investing in deterrence and resilience in their own economies.
This is also not sharing the burden. That was a repeating call, certainly Mr. Trump's first time in office. And he has since, in his campaign, the key voices around him have come out to stress they are not, in fact, against alliances, but they want reciprocity. So we have seen that between 2017 and now. Japan has increased its defense spending, increased its defense cooperation with the US and with Australia, with South Korea and other middle-sized powers. It's also been more prepared to export weapons. It's lifted the limit on weapons exports. So is the US this time around, certainly on the Japan case, let's leave aside South Korea for now, be convinced that Japan is doing its part to share the security burden?
My sense is yes. And we've seen the Japanese, through their diplomatic outreach, really invest in the United States and the think tanks and the political communities that will be providing ideas to the Trump administration. They've assigned or they've paid for what we call Japan chairs at the Hudson's Institute, Heritage Institute, and other conservative think tanks to basically put Japan's interests and tying Japan's interests to making America great again. And that has been an effective ploy that was used by the Abe administration before he was killed. And I think this is going to be the game plan for the Japanese moving forward. Other partners and countries within the region, whether it's Australia, South Korea, maybe even Singapore, are all going to look to this playbook to see how they can, again, help make America great again by contributing to the U.S. and its interests, but at the same time, not alienate that key trading partner, China. You can't divorce China. There's no decoupling away from China. You have to work with China.
Has South Korea been able to do that, or can it do that? Has it got the leverage to do that?
Well, the Yoon administration is not in a popular state right now. On my recent visit, most supporters of the administration, and of course the progressives, don't see his policies really surviving beyond his administration, which ends in about 2 years. And this will be a challenge. So how can he institutionalize some of the changes that he's put into his government, whether that's the trilateral relationship between the U.S., Japan, and South Korea, whether it is relocating some semiconductor manufacturing capabilities away from the Taiwan Straits, or even having an Indo-Pacific strategy that does mention Taiwan. How much of this will survive will really depend on who comes into power and if the Yoon administration is effective at working with the United States in the last 2 years to, again, try to institutionalize these gains, demonstrate South Korea's commitment to the U.S. ROK alliance, and that it is increasing its burden sharing within that partnership.
Our final question, Professor Nagy. One criticism of the Biden administration, it has, as it promised when Mr. Biden entered office, which was to work with allies and partners, and they have done that. But one accusation is they have failed to be equally strong on economic policy, especially in Asia, in this region where trade is strategy. Under Mr. Trump, do you see these relations being, I suppose, less securitized and moving more building on trade under Mr. Trump? Is there any likelihood of that? Final question.
Unfortunately, I see the Trump administration really investing in strengthening the industrial base in North America and really focusing on the United States. And that means renegotiating the NAFTA 2.0 agreement, probably extracting more trade agreements between the Japanese and other states at the bilateral level. And this is going to be a challenge to the region. How they can balance that, I think, again, the region's neighbors of China all believe that there's no future economic prosperity without a Chinese economy, and they're going to continue to try and engage with China, engage with the U.S., but also build resilience in their economies through diversification, and lastly, build some deterrence in terms of the complicated security challenges that face the region. But they're going to continue to engage because really that is the only game in town for countries in the region.
Thanks, Stephen Nagy from Tokyo, Professor of Politics and International Studies at the International Christian University. The US and the Philippines have inked a key deal on the sharing of military intelligence that could be one of the Biden administration's final defense initiatives in Asia before his term ends. Defense Chief Lloyd Austin signed the deal with his Philippine counterpart Gilberto Teodoro in Manila. The new deal sets up frameworks for sharing military intelligence and technology. Mr. Teodoro said the deal would help the Philippines prepare for vulnerabilities and unpredictabilities. The U.S. has the same agreement with other Indo-Pacific allies, including South Korea, Australia, and Japan. Mr. Austin emphasized Washington's unwavering commitment to its treaty ally. He will meet President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. during this visit. He will also visit the western island of Palawan tomorrow. That's where Filipino forces are stationed, where they patrol the South China Sea and defend outposts. Manila has said it's confident its alliance with the U.S. will remain strong under incoming President Donald Trump. An Australian grandmother who thought she was heading to Japan for love is on trial in a Japanese court. She's facing charges of trying to smuggle drugs into the country. Donna Nelson's trial began today in the eastern city of Chiba. Now 58, she was arrested at Tokyo's Narita airport in January last year, after officers found nearly 2 kilograms of methamphetamine in her luggage. Australian media reports say Nelson had picked up the suitcase in Laos and was meant to bring it to Japan for a man that she had met on social media. The family says she's the victim of an elaborate love scam.
She thought she was coming to Japan for her love story. She didn't have any other intention other than that, and that's what we need everyone to know and hear at the court this week.
And still ahead on this bulletin, China spent billions to shake off its air pollution problem. We find out if that has been enough to improve the situation in its biggest cities. No respite from air pollution in parts of South Asia. India's capital has woken up to the season's worst air quality, with parts of New Delhi reporting AQI upwards of 1,000. Reports coming in of severe disruptions at the city's international airport, a toxic haze interrupting flight operations. Today, India's top court will be hearing a plea seeking tighter measures to check the annual pollution problem. In a bid to counter deteriorating air quality, the strictest measures came into force this morning. Entry of trucks and non-essential polluting vehicles have been banned. In-person classes suspended except for high school students. A shift to remote working has also been advised. Flights and train services have been severely disrupted due to decreased visibility in the air. On the other side of the border, in Pakistan's Punjab province, the ban on construction is entering its second week, as are restrictions on physical classes. Starting today, universities as well will be moving online. The air quality has improved slightly in the provincial capital, Lahore, but remains in the unhealthy category. Authorities insist the uptick in air quality is a result of a successful artificial rain experiment. The air pollution crisis dominating discussions at COP29 in Baku, calling air pollution a trans-boundary issue. An Indian representative reportedly highlighting that India, Pakistan and Bangladesh fall under the same airshed. Pakistan as well has called for cooperation to mitigate the shed crisis. The World Bank recommends regional airshed policy management that could involve countries agreeing to common targets on air quality. It says more than 1.5 billion people in India and Pakistan are currently exposed to severe pollution levels and at risk of pollution-related health problems. As cities in India and Pakistan battle that toxic smog, they've taken over as the world's air pollution capitals from China. Chinese cities are seeing better air quality. Official data shows the first 9 months of 2024 were better than last year. But is China's once deadly smog or airpocalypse gone for good? CNA's Tan Chiu-yi finds out.
From this to this. Blue skies are back in China's big cities. Air pollution levels fell 54% over the past 10 years, faster than any other country in the world.
China set an unprecedented example for how fast a country can tackle air pollution when political will, social will, and resources align.
Government data shows Chinese cities are seeing good air quality about 80% of the time. For Beijing, it was 90% good days in 2023 and about 2% very bad days. That's 8 days of severe air pollution in a year, but 6 were due to sandstorms.
How did China do it? It declared war on air pollution in 2013 with this action plan, now dubbed China's most influential environmental policy, setting out the Herculean task to control air pollution. It moved heavy industries away from big cities like Beijing, encouraged buildings and households to switch to clean heating and electrified road transport. Here is a fun fact. Shenzhen in southern China became the first city in the world to electrify its entire fleet of 17,000 public buses way back in 2017.
Air pollution control costs money, and China was willing to pay. The central government invests about $4.2 billion in air pollution control every year. China's airpocalypse, something that made global news headlines for years, looks like it's over. Or is it?
我是结了婚有孩子的，然后像在幼儿园的时候，雾霾天他们就不能去户外。
之前会有这个空气净化器啊，那基本上24小时开，现在就好很多。
所以到前2天好像很差，所以我今天戴着口罩。
My apartment was this.
I also checked in with our Beijing correspondent, Olivia Xiong.
Ta-da! This is my air purifier. I have one here in the living room. I also have one in my bedroom. And, I have it on most of the time. While there are windows in the house, obviously, I do have them shut most of the time. Depending on the air quality of the day, of course, when it's obvious that the air quality is great, I take the opportunity, every opportunity to open my windows to let some fresh air in.
And Olivia has something she calls
the mountain index. So if you look out on a really clear, good air day, you're actually able to see mountains in the background. But as you can see from today, the air quality is not great.
A mountain index.
That's right. Not scientific, I must say.
Winter is peak pollution season in Beijing, mostly because of increased coal burning for heating and power generation. 99.9% of China's 1.4 billion people still live in areas where average air pollution levels exceed the World Health Organization guidelines. And there are still bad air days. Thick smog hit Beijing in March 2023, just as the capital was holding key parliamentary meetings. That year, levels of PM 2.5, or tiny particles of air pollution, saw a spike after falling for 10 years.
You often see air pollution cited in terms of the number of people it kills. It's millions across the world every year. But that number is so large and so difficult to connect with your own life.
Krista's research team has made that connection. Their Air Quality Life Index translates air pollution into the impact on human life expectancy. And it shows people are losing as much as 3.2 years of life on average in China's most polluted region, which includes Beijing.
That's not just necessarily at the end of a long life, that also factors in lives that are cut short, like children or babies who are even more deeply affected by air pollution than, say, adult populations.
China issued a new air quality action plan in December to cut PM 2.5 levels by 10% by 2025. It's a good move, but experts say these targets are getting harder and harder to meet.
There's still a long way to go, but improving the air quality is because of this lower hanging fruit is no longer there. It will be a more sort of uphill battle.
A University of Chicago study says China's battle against air pollution has improved air quality for the whole world. The question is, can it continue the good fight? Tan Chiu-yi, CNA, Singapore.
The UN chief Antonio Guterres has urged G20 countries to use their leadership in the fight against climate change as financing negotiations stall at the ongoing COP29 in Azerbaijan. The G20 is expected to address a wide range of issues, including the climate crisis. Mr. Guterres says the spotlight falls naturally on the bloc, with the 20 major economies accounting for 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions. He's called on leaders to do more to tackle global warming.
Finance fuels ambition, and I will appeal to the sense of responsibility of all G20 countries. Now is the time for leadership by example from the world's largest economies and emitters. Failure is not an option.
G20 countries account for 85% of the world's economy. The bloc's leaders hold the purse strings to billions of dollars that many are hoping could be used to steer climate finance. But uncertainty over incoming U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's stance on climate is threatening an already tough task. The president-elect is reportedly preparing to again withdraw the country from the Paris Climate Accord. And that's East Asia Tonight for this Monday. Don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia. Plus, we're on Facebook and YouTube.